Welcome back. You're listening to the Sports Hour here on Flow FM, and it's time to check in with Eddie Dadds from secplaybook.com.au. He's our world sports expert here on Flow FM. Eddie, great to be with you again. How are you?
I am fantastic, Ellis. It's great to be back. We've got AFL to talk about today. We've got F1. It's just absolutely cracking. We had the golf going on this morning. Jordan Spieth has nearly won another tournament. It's honestly all happening. It's great to be here. Back in Adelaide, you and I caught up over the weekend, went to the mighty Adelaide United. They smacked the Phoenix 5-1, so that was fantastic. Just good times, good vibes over here.
Absolutely action-packed stuff, and we've got plenty of motorsport to discuss on our agenda today. So let's firstly look at McLaren, Eddie. There's a bit to take out from this. So firstly, the move on Daniel Ricciardo looks like it was a masterstroke in the end.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we've discussed a little bit over the last couple of weeks, Ellis. So Daniel Ricciardo obviously leaving McLaren at the end of last season. They didn't want anything to do with him any longer. He'd had a rough couple of years with the Orange team over there. He wasn't going too well. I think they ended up paying him something like $29 million to buy out his contract in the end. Ricciardo's gone on. He's taking a bit of a break from F1. He's the backup driver at Redbull, which basically entails doing a whole lot of not much by the sounds of it. He hasn't even been at the last couple of Grand Prix. He's making his first Grand Prix appearance in the coming fortnight at the Melbourne Grand Prix. So that's the first time we'll sort of see him back in pit lane. But yeah, since he's left McLaren, it's basically been an unmitigated disaster for them. They would have been hoping to be pushing towards the top three in Formula One this season. Instead, they can't seem to get out of their own way. They had both of their cars had to have pit stops within the first three laps in the race overnight in Saudi Arabia. So Oscar Piastri, who's the young Australian, he qualified in P8, which was a fantastic effort. He looks like he's going to be a great driver for many years to come. But he lost control a little bit on the opening lap. Hurt his wing, so he had to come in and pit. Lando Norris, their other star driver, has been having issues with his car all season so far. He also had to come in. They ended up finishing P17 and P18. Basically, the sentiment here, Alex, is that Daniel Ricciardo has absolutely dodged a bullet by not coming back to McLaren this season. You know, if he had been having these P17 and P18 finishes, it would have hurt his stocks even more than they were already hurt. He might not have been able to get back on the grid. At this rate, there's going to be a number of seats up for grabs at the end of this season. So Daniel Ricciardo just sitting back, relaxing, getting paid $30 million to do nothing. He'd be having a fantastic time right now.
I feel like the most stress he'll have this year is being the number one ticket holder for West Coast, Eddie. But we won't speak too much about that right now. Now let's talk about Red Bull, because there's been a frosty moment captured on camera in the fallout from the latest motorsport action. And we're talking about Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez. A little bit of a underwhelmed reaction from both of them, squaring off at one another, Eddie, in what is known as the cooldown room. So what did you make of this?
Yeah, this is classic Max Verstappen. He came from 15th on the grid, Ellis. He had a really bad qualifying session. The car didn't do him any favours, so he started the race in 15th. In typical Max Verstappen fashion, he absolutely stormed through the field. I think he was started from 15th and ended up in second after less than half the race. So that should tell you how far ahead of the competition Red Bull are at the moment. Their two cars are way out in front. Sergio Perez, Checo, is the number 2 driver at Red Bull, the clear number 2 driver. But he started on pole, did really, really well. Was holding pole position throughout the race. Max Verstappen came up behind him. They basically duelled for the second half of the race, which was really fascinating stuff. F1's a great sport in that respect. Even though they're sort of teammates, they are also mortal enemies at the same time. So Max ended up finished the race 5 seconds behind Sergio Perez, which for the neutral fan is a fantastic result, but for the Max Verstappen fan is not such a good result. It's one of those situations where occasionally the team can sort of say, "Hey Sergio, do you mind letting Max through here so he can finish?" But the team didn't do that. Sergio ended up winning the race, and Max Verstappen is probably the only person in the world who would be upset with a second place finish in a Formula One race. But that's where we're at this point. Relationships are a little frosty between these two, but I think it's one of those ones, Ellis, where they're kind of spurring each other on to greater and greater heights. I think as it stands at the moment, this is actually quite a productive relationship. They're clearly both very competitive people, and I think it's one of those things where they're going to be pushing each other to achieve greater things.
For those that don't watch a whole lot of motorsport, the cool down room, is it literally that, Eddie? Are there plenty of ACs on in there blasting?
It legitimately is, Ellis. They come from one of the hottest environments in the world. These cars definitely don't have air conditioning. That's not something that they put into these cars because they're trying to they're trying to minimise the amount of weight in a car as much as possible. So the guys are driving around out there in 30-degree plus heat in the middle of the desert in Saudi Arabia. So they get in, they come into this cool-down room. It's sort of a place for them to collect their thoughts, to sort of think about the race. They've got to get their thoughts together before they go out into onto the podium and do press and that sort of thing. So it is a cool-down room in all respects. But not for Max Verstappen, it seems. It's quite a heated room for Max Verstappen.
Yeah, not the place for a Mexican standoff in front of cameras, that's for sure. Now, let's talk about Alexander Mitrovic. He's the Fulham striker over in England in the English Premier League. This was an FA Cup game, and it was being hosted by Manchester United at Old Trafford. Fulham in the lead, surprisingly, Eddie, but it all went south pretty quickly, and we had this extraordinary 1 minute where there were 3 red cards issued, one of those to the manager of Fulham, that being Marco Silva. But it's all about Alexander Mitrovic and what the Serbian did to the referee. It's being called a assault of the referee, which we don't usually talk about, Eddie, in football. So this is a pretty extraordinary story coming out of the world of sport over the past 24 hours.
Yeah, crazy one. I just one of those ones, Ellis, that the reaction on Twitter was essentially like, oh, wow, we've never really seen this happen before. And I certainly haven't seen it happen. So Fulham up 1-0 in an FA Cup quarter-final against Manchester United, looking fantastic, absolutely dominating. Willian was trying to block sort of a goal line block out sort of thing and raised his arm. It was a clear handball. The ref went to the VAR to check it out. It was quite obviously going to be a handball. So Willian gets a red card for the blatant handball stopping a goal. So okay, that is what it is. It's a penalty. Then the Fulham manager Marco Silva went absolutely ballistic on referee Chris Kavanagh. He got shown a red card. This is all happening in the space of 30, 40 seconds. And then after the manager was sent off, yeah, like you say, Alexander Mitrovic basically just barged into the referee. I don't know what he expects to happen by doing that. The most bizarre part of this whole thing is, from my standpoint, it's a clear penalty, right? There's it's a clear red card initially to Willian. Am I missing something there?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you, Eddie. It's all a bit bizarre, but Alexander Mitrovic, if he's not banging in the goals, he's making headlines for very different reasons, it seems. We'll park that there, though, Eddie. I want to return home and talk about the AFL. Round 1 completed, and it appears it was a great first-time round for a number of coaches. 4 coaches all successful in round 1 of the competition starting up again. I can't remember the last time that happened. What were your takeaways from the first round of AFL, Eddie?
Oh, just a brilliant round of football, Alex, in all respects. I think the AFL couldn't be much happier with how that round has progressed. I happened to catch on Twitter before that the total crowd number for round 1 in the AFL was 391,000, which is obviously enormous, and it's helped by Richmond and Carlton, Geelong, Collingwood on Thursday and Friday night. But that's still enormous. Essendon Hawthorn had 68,000 at the MCG yesterday afternoon. For reference sake, the NRL had 159,000 people in their most recent round. So the AFL is more than doubling the NRL in crowd numbers, which, yeah, I mean, the NRL is more of a TV sport. We know that, but that's still a huge disparity in crowd numbers. And I think it was justified. The style of football, for the most part, was really attractive. Richmond Carlton, I thought was a horrible game. I didn't really enjoy watching that, but the rest of the games of the round were really supremely entertaining. Like you say, we got 4 new coaches in Ross Lyon, Brad Scott, Adam Kingsley, all pulling in wins in their first games as head coaches, which is fantastic. We love to see that. Just really positive stuff across the league. I said this on the podcast a few weeks ago that Port Adelaide were my smoky top 4 pick, and I feel really good about that after watching them dismantle the Brisbane Lions in the second half. I thought Sydney were amazing against the Gold Coast, and I think it's going to be a really long year for Hawthorn and your boys, the West Coast Eagles. I thought they were probably the 2 worst teams of the round. What were your thoughts watching the Eagles first up get beaten by North Melbourne?
Well, let's just leave it at I wasn't surprised. I know going into the game that a lot of West Coast fans and a lot of the noise coming out of WA was that North Melbourne just aren't in good nick, and there's no excuse not to go away and win this game. But knowing Alistair Clarkson was going to be in the coaching centre and knowing that it was his first game certainly gave me plenty of reason not to be confident, and it seems that that's the way things went. But Eddie, was there any any one particular performer that surprised you the most over all the games that we had in round one?
I wouldn't say surprised me, Ellis, but I was absolutely thrilled to see Jason Horne-Francis from Port Adelaide. He honestly ripped the game apart against the Brisbane Lions, and that's sort of what we've been expecting from him for the last, since he came into the AFL as a rookie last season. I really thought he was gonna be capable of these sort of performances right off the bat, but it has taken him a little time to get there. He was absolutely magnificent. The other one that I think is a real watch list for this year's Brownlow medal is Tom Green from GWS. He was magnificent. The Giants were down and out against Adelaide. They had none on the bench. There were injuries left, right, and centre, and the Giants in Canelio and Tom Green really stood up. Apart from that, I have to say, and your listeners are probably gonna think I'm very biased here, but that was one of the more encouraging Essendon performances that I've seen in a long time. Our defence looked amazing. We were moving the ball really swiftly. The young players, Archie Perkins, Alvin Davey, Jordan Ridley seems back to his best. I was really encouraged. Not to say I'm looking at grand final tickets yet, and I do think Hawthorn are probably going to be the wooden spooners, but I was really encouraged by the Bombers.
No reason not to toot your own horn after a performance like that in round one. Eddie, scplaybook.com.au, let's discuss why we should all be heading there right now after what's been, as you say, a very exciting first round of AFL, and also there's plenty of drama going on in the NRL too. So what are the scplaybook.com.au contributors currently making of the first round of AFL and how we're currently placed in the NRL, Eddie?
Well, normally, Ellis, the first 3 rounds of Supercoach are a little bit to date. You don't tend to use your trades too early. But this week we are going to be forced to use trades. So Liam Jones is injured. He was a really popular cheapie option in Supercoach. Tom Stewart obviously injured as well. Josh Kelly has a concussion, so he's probably going to miss. Those are 3 of the more popular players in Supercoach. So people with those guys in their teams are going to have to figure out a way to maneuver their team around and trade to get out of that. And that's the SC Playbook is the perfect place to go and check that out because we've got podcasts coming out. I'm recording the podcast tonight. We've got articles left, right, and centre. And as you say, big times in the NRL as well. There was round 3 in the NRL. Teams are starting to move away from the pack in the NRL. So couldn't encourage you more to check out scplaybook.com.au. We've got lots of good stuff up on there.
Eddie Dad's our world sports expert here on Flow FM. Great to be with you again, Eddie. We'll do it all again in a week's time and enjoy all the sport.
Thanks, Ella. Speak to you soon.